Disclaimer, the contents of this podcast doesn't really spoil a whole lot, but I guarantee you'll get pissed off if you think you're right about your Spider-Man argument. Hello everyone, and welcome to an interlude for the Flying Feathers podcast. My name is Nathan D. Gonder, and unfortunately, I'll be the only one that you have to suffer through today. Chase got caught up at a tire shop, and Donovan's currently in a hurricane. My thoughts and prayers go out to Donovan. I know we also didn't have an episode last week, but that was my fault. It was my first week at school, and unfortunately, I am a victim to the American college education system, so I had a lot to do during that. But anyway, I still wanted to get something out there, and what better than my latest superhero article that premiered on my website, flamingohousefilm.com. That is www.flamingohousefilm.com. Go check it out, sign up for the subscriber list. Also, I have a YouTube channel. Go subscribe to that too. All that aside, this article was something that caused a little bit of argument on my Instagram. I made a post about it, and from the title of this cast, you can probably tell why people got so heated about it. Yes, there were a lot of answers, and is there a right or a wrong answer? Yes. But we'll get to that. So here's a little bit of film theory for you, film and comic book theory. As you can judge, it's going to be quite broad, but that's okay, right? We're still friends, right? Please? So Spider-Man has gone through a lot of films, TV shows, and games. Spider-Man portrayed on the big screen is a touchy subject for a lot of people, and thousands of people fight for Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield as their childhood favorites. I'd also like to say real quick that I am not forgetting the Miles Morales Spider-Man that was in Sony's Into the Spider-Verse. This list is exclusively just about live-action adaptations. I hope we get one of him soon. I arguably like him more than Peter Parker, sorry. And while I'm a huge fan of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films that I grew up with, I understand the faults that lie within. The many, many faults. Oh, there's so many. At the time I heard about the cancellation of Sony's Amazing Spider-Man series, I was relieved that those films were done, but saddened that we would yet again have to go through another reboot with a new Peter Parker, Aunt May, and dead Uncle Ben, and I wasn't about to sit through another 2 or 3 films of cringy Peter love interest dialogue written by people who don't understand how teenagers talk. But then the clouds moved away and the sun shone down on us because Sony decided to bite their greed and give Marvel Studios weekend custody rights of Spider-Man. Even though Disney ultimately loves money and lots of it, I know that they tried their best to give a faithful interpretation of Peter Parker's web slinger in his debut film, Captain America: Civil War. When the trailer dropped and Spider-Man stole Cap's shield, my jaw dropped with it. Everything looked right on a visual level. The suit looked slick and updated, though in spots it was obvious CGI. The eyes move expressively, and perhaps the most rewarding of all, Spider-Man had the voice of a teenage boy. I'd like to remind everybody that Tobey Maguire was 26 when he played Spider-Man. But who could judge it based off of that? It's all well and nice, yes, but that's just a glimpse of a performance that was shot before an actor was even slated. Not fake, look it up. But with young actor Tom Holland donning the mask, how did it shape up when we actually watched the movie? I'll just put it this way. The title of this video poses a very touchy subject for a lot of you listeners. Who is the best live-action Spider-Man? Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, or Tom Holland? Now I'll give you a second to think about it. Second's over. It's Tom Holland. I'll just say this. Tom Holland's Spider-Man has been the best adaptation of the character so far. In this instance, I don't care about your childhood. I care about comic book accuracy and faithful adaptations. Tom Holland's acting paired with the way they wrote and directed the character is what makes this version so amazing. They understood Spider-Man's motives and themes better than Sony ever has, and not only that, but Tom Holland wasn't even 20 years old when they shot the film. Imagine that. A Spider-Man actor that wasn't just a grown man in teenager's clothes. I'd also like to mention that Andrew Garfield was 28 when he played Spider-Man. Now, I'm not going to go into details about the Tom Holland Spider-Man films, because frankly, I've already reviewed those films, and you can see them on my website. That's www.flamingohousefilm.com. Just navigate to the articles tab, and then you'll be able to find it. And hey, read some other articles while you're at it. But if you read those reviews, you'll know that I like the directions that these films have gone in, and if there's anything to compare to the previous films, it's Peter Parker. So let's talk about the Raimi trilogy. So Peter Parker was played by Tobey Maguire for the Sam Raimi Spider-Man film trilogy, and while I enjoyed his character a lot, there are some things that I just can't get past. Something always irked me about this interpretation and how easily he let the famous Spider-Man get to his head, becoming inconsiderate and going against a lot of what Peter should stand for. We subconsciously hate Peter Parker because everyone surrounding him treats him like garbage. It's one thing for Peter to be a high school nerd, which I'd like to mention is now totally acceptable, but literally everyone shits on him constantly for no reason. I remember being a child and having a hard time liking Peter Parker because I didn't understand what he possibly did previous to make everyone hate him so much. I understand the direction with the character, but they went way too far with it. By the third film, everybody was finally being nice to him, and one of my thoughts was just, what the hell is this? On top of that, his dynamic with Mary Jane Watson was one of the worst on-screen relationships I've ever seen. MJ is not only manipulative, but she's jealous throughout all these 3 films, and I'll note that she doesn't even like Peter Parker until he becomes someone that's actually important to her. And before you get pissed at me for saying all this, remember, it is my opinion, and nothing changes how much I love these films, but I'm also able to recognize their faults. If there's a painting that you really like, I mean you love this painting, it speaks to you, it makes you feel all of the good feelings that make you feel happy, it has all of the serotonin that feeds your brain with all that yummy delight, yet one color is just not blended correctly, you're allowed to say, hey, that color wasn't blended correctly. But you know what? I still like this as a whole. You don't just ignore it. You don't just sweep it under the rug as if it doesn't exist. You acknowledge that Spider-Man is not a 26-year-old man. But anyway, that trilogy was cut short. Even though there were plans of a 4th film, it didn't make it because Sony wanted to reboot it using Mark Webb as the director of the new Amazing Spider-Man films. When I first saw these, I didn't like them at all. I credited that to the performances, namely Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, but the longer the films went on, the more I realized that it wasn't Garfield's fault at all. In fact, I think he's one of the best actors of this generation now. The fault was how these films were written. The dialogue is atrociously bad. Every scene involving Gwen Stacy and Peter Parker's cringeworthy vomit. The motives are also all wrong. Spider-Man is once again vengeful, and Peter Parker is way too cool to be Peter Parker. His wardrobe is plucked out of Forever 21, and the boy skateboards to class. No law-abiding nerd would skateboard to class. What the hell kind of a fool do you take me for? His charm is lost because he's no longer a science-loving kid. He's just a douchebag teenager with nice hair and a beanie. And once more, this is not at the fault of Andrew Garfield. Watch any film he's made after these, you'll see that he is a respectful actor who takes his career and integrity seriously. I have a feeling that he wanted to make his Spider-Man into much more than what the studio wanted. He did the best with this script, but unfortunately, you just can't fix something that's already shit. But are there redeeming qualities about these versions? Of course there are. Tobey Maguire was never afraid to show real human emotion on what a frantic crying face really looks like. And Andrew Garfield had the ability to quip like Spider-Man should without making the snaps sound cringy at all. And the costumes in these films? Well, my favorite Spider-Man suit ever is the first of the Raimi trilogy, and the second installment of the Amazing series has the most realistic looking Spider-Man suit in any film. But what's made the MCU Spider-Man different? Well, the first thing I noticed when watching the film was his light Queen's accent. It's just enough to sell that he's actually from New York without being boisterous or obnoxious. And on top of that, his voice is just right to sell that he's a teenager, even though I believe he's like 23 now. What about what's written for him, though? Well, alongside the accuracy and believable dialogue, finally, this Spider-Man is the strongest of what we've seen because he's got such a stable sense of what's right. We haven't seen him hurt anybody out of grief or use his powers for his own benefit, and we understand that he just wants to help. I have a feeling that this Peter Parker would still try to do what's right regardless of his powers. He understands that he's just some kid, but that doesn't stop him from trying to do his best. That's everything that Spider-Man should be. He doesn't let anything go to his head, and he doesn't use his ability to get what he wants. He's the purest of the Avengers, and as I've said in my Homecoming review, he's second to Captain America for the MCU Boy Scout. But on top of all this, Peter Parker is constantly conflicted by his desire to be a normal kid sometimes. It motivates him, it leads him to some conflicts, and above all, it keeps him human. Are there faults? Of course. There will never be a perfect Spider-Man. But as I've said many times, this is the one that comic fans have waited for. We put our childhood nostalgia second for a faithful adaptation of a character that changed comic books forever. Now, previously I mentioned how Sony bit their greed. I don't know if you can tell, but that was a joke. In fact, I think that Sony is in the right with this whole Sony versus Disney conflict bullcrap that's going on. I'm glad they shut the door, because when you look at it, Disney owns way too much of the box office right now. I mean, the fact that they want half of Spider-Man movies that they don't even fully finance or write is ridiculous, especially for one of the only movie studios that exists right now that isn't absorbed by the monopoly company. But at first, yeah, I thought it was the fault of Sony because they wouldn't accept taking only 50% of the profits, but really try to look at it this way. 6 out of the 10 highest grossing films of 2019 are Disney properties, through Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilms, and now Fox. Disney owns more box office revenue than any other company ever should. I couldn't blame Sony for trying to keep that away from Disney. but I'm saddened that one of the truest comic book adaptations that we've had has now had to be taken back away from us because of money. But anyway, that's the interlude for this week. Thank you guys for joining me. I know that it was a short one, but I wanted to give you something because I love you. I love you so much. Can I have some money, please? I promise I'll pay you back. And I think this goes without saying, but this was definitely not the Spider-Man episode. In fact, the Spider-Man episode will probably be full with a lot of different ideas and opinions on what we think of Spider-Man. And hell, I'm just excited to pit them all against each other in a school gymnasium. Ha! That shit'll be cool. Anyways, please join us next week, and if everything goes right, we should have Donovan and Chase back on board for more wacky, goofy podcast antics, and a lot more of the F word. Thank you for listening, and stay sticky, everybody. That was a Spider-Man thing. That wasn't supposed to be gross. I'm sorry. That was... Hey, did you like this podcast? I know I didn't. But if you want to know more about it and keep updated with us, we have an official Instagram and Twitter page, which will be linked below. Expect a new episode next Friday. Hopefully.